My name is James Gibbs. I've been an abutting landowner at 14 Jackson Avenue for 14 years. That's on the east side of what locals refer to as Spar Yard Cove. I'm also a licensed architect and a state-certified architect historian, and therefore request that you consider my testimony tonight herewith as an expert witness. In such capacity, I wrote the Historic District Guidelines for the town of Groton, which includes the other side of Mystic. I was also a charter member of the Mystic River Park Commission. Primarily, my job was to coordinate the landscape architecture. I really wanted to be up here in support, but I just cannot, given the extraordinary size of the proposal. The proposed project needs to be cut literally by 3/4. I hope I might be up here in a month or two to support a substantially revised project. As such, I recommend that the applicant withdraw its application and resubmit. I have been a customer of the applicant in both Noank and Mystic, and I admire the Holstein family approach in Noank as to its wonderfully maintained and operated marina in Noank. I have hoped they would do the same over the last years in Mystic, but it seems its design professionals have advised otherwise. The commission should all have my memo of 28 June 2019 as issued the scheduled date of the first hearing date. I shall not reread same to expedite. I shall just highlight my concerns per that memo. DEP should weigh in per the Coastal Management Act. It did just that a few hours after I submitted my memo. We all know now that DEP has advised against the proposed zone change. If the project is approved in the floodplain as proposed, the town will likely lose its favorable rating for flood insurance, and we who live elsewhere in the floodplain will all see our rates increase. The townhouses should be limited altogether. The applicant is proposing an approximate 15 setback from a coastal resource. The proposed townhouses will obstruct the view from our Jackson Avenue residents. On our side of the cove, we must maintain a 100 feet rear yard setback from the marsh as part of RC 120, intended by the town to protect this important shoreline feature. RC 120 should also be applicable to the proposed project overlooking the same shoreline feature, thereby preventing any obstruction within 100 feet of this undeveloped coastal resource. New developer should be on the riverside. I would say that the proposed townhouses are 100 times more invasive than the Phragmite down there. On Memorial Day weekend, Sunday afternoon, I counted 248 cars and no available parking spaces, and that was for the existing marina and restaurant uses. The proposal only includes 318 spaces on the site. That is only a 28% increase in parking, yet something like a 400% increase in proposed site use. If approved, the town will need to introduce resident parking stickers, just as Newport has had to do. Traffic considerations are proportionate. I can add that since I submitted my memo, there were 218 cars at 2 p.m. yesterday. This past Friday, not a holiday, there were 232 cars at 1:30 p.m. On Sunday, June 9, a regular 2-day weekend, there were 198 cars at 11:30 a.m. That's before lunch even really gets going. The fundamental problem is that the standard town parking requirement is 1 car per 4 restaurant seats. That is an antiquated requirement. The proper parking requirement should be 1 car per 2 seats. The town of Groton does this a bit differently in permitting 3 cars per 100 square feet, but that square footage includes back of the house. By back of the house, I mean the kitchen and storage. When calculated per the building code at 1 seat per 15 square feet, that's what the building code requires, and assuming 25% of the gross area to be back of house, Groton's parking comes in almost exactly at 1 car per 2 seats. The Neighborhood Development District allows the Commission to acquire this more appropriate and stricter standard in deference to the neighborhood, and it should do so. Proposed staff off-site parking has no sidewalk access to the site and will create early morning and late night disturbance in our RH10 residential zone immediately across the street from 4 historic residents on Jackson Avenue. I also add that the application is incomplete as its master plan includes no topographic information. I also note that there are no renderings of the project as viewed from ground level east of the code. Again, per my memo, I recommend the following. Traffic access to the site only via a two-way Cultural Street extension with only emergency access from Willow Street. Eliminate all townhouses. Do not add to restaurant use. Cut the high-rise height by a couple stories. Prohibit all off-site parking. Calculate restaurant parking at 1 car per 2 seats. Keep the site a predominantly water-dependent use, considering the existing restaurant and a potential modest boutique hotels as amenities to the marina and as such accessory to that water-dependent use. In conclusion, I do want this site to be appropriately upgraded, but what is currently proposed is extraordinarily inappropriately scaled. Thank you.
Thank you. 38 Bardell Avenue, 27 Water Street, 20 Rossi Street, 4 Conrad Street, 5 Rathbun Place, 15 Home Street. Now, is anyone else who'd like to speak in opposition that I did not call? They can come up now.
Go ahead.
Mary Hendrickson. I live at 20 Rossi Street. I'd like to make some comments that relate to the architect's comments of the June 17th meeting. The comparison of Smiler's Point with Stonington Commons in Stonington Borough is very flawed. The main condo building at Stonington Commons was reproduced after the fire. The footprint of the building was pre-existing nonconformity. The association at Stonington Commons does not allow for VBRO or Airbnb, and I doubt whether the same will be true of the condos, apartments, and individual townhouses proposed for Smilers. In response to the land use expert, Smilers is proposing a hardscape and rock shoring of their acreage. They would take out the grasses to increase the water views. This wetland, which they propose to eliminate, is the beginning of the buffer for the natural floodplain, which is between Jackson and Willow, and then it flows towards the parking lot behind St. Patrick's. Haven't we all seen the water overflowing the roads in these areas during our more frequent and big storms? Why would we want to make the flooding worse and endanger the historic buildings in this area? My response to the traffic expert: given the nature of this proposed development and the continuing increase of traffic in Mystic, I would imagine the police department would need to be directing traffic in multiple places in town. For example, Willow and Route 1, the Flagpole intersection, Mason's Island, and maybe even Coogan and Greenmanville. Our town is a mass frustration for vehicle drivers. I believe the DEP letter was clear as to why this zoning change should not be considered, and I won't repeat the contents. We might look at the historic town of Newburyport, Massachusetts, which seeks to protect its character while promoting appropriate growth. It states that the town should prohibit development if there is not adequate public infrastructure to serve the new development. a requirement called concurrency. For a development to be concurrent, the local government must ensure enough infrastructure capacity to serve each proposed development and must be reviewed to determine if there is both current and reserve capacity in a concurrency review. If there has been a concurrency review, I would say it ignored congestion that we see every weekend in off-season and every day during the tourist season. The result of inadequate infrastructure throughout Mystic will affect the quality of life for residents, make the area less appealing for visitors. In addition, the design of Smiler's Wharf, which does not enhance the abutting National Register district, will also overwhelm the village character and negate the feeling of neighborhood within our town. The Stonington PZC should say no to off-site parking, intolerable traffic congestion, and protect the historic neighborhood and sensitive wetland areas adjacent to the project. Ultimately, will Mystic continue to be a village community that welcomes visitors or a vehicle for profit, putting that community at risk of destruction for short-term gain? If the latter, if Stonington agrees to the latter, it will lose in the long run. I hope you will consider our community and historic neighborhoods with care, the care we entrusted to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Dean Anderson, and for the last 41 years I've lived on Water Street in the borough. But in 1974 I lived on Cottrell Street in Mystic, right across from the old lumberyard, and worked at Seaport Marine as a boat carpenter. I'm probably the only person in this room who has both ridden in a boat that was built in that boatyard and worked there too. At the time I was studying small craft design, and that's why I was there. As a former boat builder, I can tell you that certain sizes of boats can only be accommodated on the waterfront. You don't move 64-footers around in a trailer. And you better hope they can't figure out a way to do it. Hotels, restaurants, and residences can be located inland and should be, okay? Architecture aside, building heights beside, boatyards can only be on the waterfront, and I think that's what the DEP says in their letter to you, which I have read. But statements by the applicant that said that they couldn't make a go of it as a boatyard. Well, I'll tell you that in 1974, when I worked there during the America's Cup races, escort boats from Newport were coming down to Mystic to be serviced because all the boatyards in Newport were filled with, America's Cup boats. And they needed somewhere to go to get their engines fixed and their, things repaired. And they'd bring them down to Mystic. It's not that far by water. It's a, short drive. But the business is out there. The boating industry is growing. And you can't just start turning, existing boatyards into shishi, condos and this sort of thing. Nice, but just doesn't belong there. Like I say, for the last 41 years, I've lived in the borough, and at that time I've seen much of the village and its houses turned into weekend homes for the well-off New Yorkers and others. And I think that's about what's going to happen to Mystic if we let this kind of thing go on. The day-to-day working people that live there now they're going to be pulling up their anchors and leaving. And so much for the village as it now exists. So that's really about all I've got to say. No, I'm not going to read you all these magazines.
Thank you.
But that's my point. Leave it a boatyard.
Hi, my name is Mary Blanchette. I live at 17 Joyce Street, which is on the other side of Mystic, near Mystic.
Can't hear you.
Sorry. I live near Mystic YMCA, 17 Joyce Street. Recently, in the past 2 years, we've had a building that's been put up in our neighborhood. It's a one-building residence. I live on a road that's similar to Jackson Avenue. We've had no less than 10 trucks going down our road, 18-wheelers, every single day for the past 2 years. So when I think about this project in this neighborhood, I like Mystic. I like that it's a small town. I like it that it kind of closes up shop at 10 p.m. and it gets quiet. I think that's why a lot of people live here. I've lived here for 29 years. I love my neighborhood, and again, it's a small street. I also know residents who live over on Jackson Avenue and in that area, or who have lived there. And when I think about the impact of this project on their families and their home life and their quality of life, I find it concerning and alarming. And I feel bad for them that this proposal has come up for this area. I feel that this project could go somewhere else that had more property. I know that there was a point where they showed a building that was on site, like a factory building approximately 100 years ago. That was a large building, but again, that was approximately 100 years ago. There was a lot less traffic, a lot less people, a lot less homes, residences in the area, and I do feel that this is too much in that area specifically because the roads leading into it are one-lane roads, small roads, and are not equipped for that. Just driving into Stonington High School tonight, I was thinking that here we sit in one building. This building is occupied 10 months a year during the day. It's the other building, the Human Resources building, now that was the former police station, is occupied 12 months of the year, but during the day, and then there is a park. And for those two buildings in one park, you have a 2-lane road and you have a traffic light. If you look across the street at the current police station in the plaza, leading out there is the same traffic light and a 2-lane road. There's no 2-lane road that leads into this wharf. That is a major concern. I don't know if the town is prepared to shut down the bridge, keeping the bridge closed indefinitely, or maybe once or twice a day opening. I think the bridge opening is one of the major aspects that people come to Mystic to see, especially if they've seen the movie Mystic Pizza. I don't mind tourists. I don't mind tourism. I don't mind. I think there are apartment buildings that could be built in our area. I know there is a vacant hotel close to the highway. I feel that we're trying to add too much, and the buildings that are displayed are too high, and I don't want Mystic to be a metropolis. I want it to be a nice hometown area where future generations can enjoy growing up. I also have the environmental concerns as well, and for those reasons, I would encourage the commission to deny the zoning change. Thank you.
My name is Eleanor Wenderoth, and I live at 45 Essex Street in West Mystic. And I believe that you must have lost at least one full page of people who wanted to speak in opposition to this, because my name was not called.
Well, I haven't got, did you sign up the other day?
I signed up the first night, one of the first people.
Oh, yeah, Ellen Wentworth. I called you the other night.
Well, not that I heard.
You're number 3 on the list.
Not that I heard, and not that any of my friends heard. In any case, I oppose the Smiler Wharf zone change and project, which was documented by a letter presented to the board by my husband, Charles Wenderoth, on June 17th. The developers presenting their proposal to the board at that meeting indicated very proudly that they were Stonington residents, but not Mystic residents. I say to you, how would you like this project in your front yard or your backyard? You, the Planning and Zoning Board, have not permitted high-rise buildings and Newport-like structures in Stonington Village. Why would you think they should be permitted in the village of Mystic? Tourists come to Mystic because it is a village. If they want an overdeveloped, artificial town, let them go to Newport or somewhere else. The developers are proposing bulkheads of an unspecified height to hold back the land and keep the river water out. As many other people said, water has to go somewhere, and it will go around the ends of or over the bulkheads, swirling and eroding the soil and marshland behind it. It will also seek other areas to flood, as it did in Hurricane Sandy not that long ago. If you don't remember, just look at some of the pictures. We're also past due for a 100-year flood, which has been predicted now for many years. When the traffic specialist gave his presentation, there was no mention of the congestion along Route 1 when the Baskill Bridge goes up. It's a nightmare today, which many people today have talked about. What will it be like during construction and after completion when all the tourists and residents are trying to access or leave the area? The Seaport Marine area already floods, as many people said. How does the town of Stonington plan to evacuate residents and guests from Smiler Wharf after the developers have made their money and are long gone? The town of Stonington, the state of Connecticut, and the feds will have to deal with the mess and the problems that the developers created. In addition, since the DEEP has told the town that the project is inappropriate for this flood hazard location because it puts people's lives at risk, it becomes a liability issue for the town of Stonington. Where will that money come from? Not from the developers, for sure. It will have to come from the town of Stonington coffers, or ultimately the Stonington residents, when your taxes are raised to cover the legal fees. It's marshland and boatyard for a reason. Downtown Mystic needs preservation and parking, not hotels and high-rises. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Wardle. I live on 4 Conrad Street, which is in West Mystic. My family has lived in Mystic since 1634, so we're long-timers. Everyone else has very eloquently made points that I totally agree with about the development of Mystic. I'm just going to touch on a few of them to make this go faster. One is the proposal presented is more urban waterfront than historic district, and we do have historic districts in Mystic that are meant to preserve the character of Mystic. The developers argue that this is appropriate and hold up the 1910 main block building and powerhouse as a standard to go by. They want us to use these outliers that are not typical. Typical is a 2 to 3 story historic building that gives Mystic its charm. And these are what should be used as the guidelines for development. Those should be the standard. It's like a typical sales pitch. You put out something here and say you should compare it to this, when really you should be comparing it to something else. This will make Mystic a more vibrant town. Well, there are already 46 restaurants in Mystic, 57 if you include lunch and breakfast places. Every storefront is occupied. Mystic has popular parades, events, and concerts, and Mystic is already more than vibrant. Another question, someone has already brought this up, but how many of the proposed 25 apartments and 16 townhouses are quickly going to be de facto Airbnbs, further degrading the neighborhood with noise and traffic? This development proposes to change the character of Mystic. It's more for tourists, for more noise, more traffic, and many, many residents like Mystic as it is, maybe even a bit quieter. Okay, just a couple of economic points. Many of the 150-ish equivalent full-time jobs are really just part-time seasonal jobs. The greater Mystic area already has a hard time filling summer jobs as it is. Area restaurants bring in people from abroad to get qualified summer staff. The Ocean House alone requested 112 H-2B and J-1 visas. There clearly is not a shortage of part-time seasonal job openings in our area. If you want your child to have a summer job in Mystic, the jobs are there. Someone made this point more eloquently than this, but looking to the future, maintaining bulkheads and shoreline structure is very expensive. I'm an engineer. I get this. We always had to look at maintenance costs and future costs as proposals. Who's going to pay for that? The town, the state, the taxpayers? Finally, DEP concerns. DEP is against this proposals, and there are plenty of other places in Stonington appropriate for residential and hotel development. Stonington does not need to sacrifice rare MC80 land for this use. It will never get it back. As you know, this is an AE11 flood zone. An article in the New York Times from June 19th of this year, and it's on funding to save coastal communities from increasing flooding risks. And it says cities could increase their chances of getting money, that's from the federal government, by reducing their exposure to disasters, perhaps by retrofitting their buildings, implementing aggressive building codes and zoning restrictions, and helping residents leave the most vulnerable neighborhoods. The state and federal government want to move people away from flood-prone areas, not build new stuff in them. What would do it if you ran this by FEMA? What would they think? And finally, on a more personal note, even though I've lived in Mystic my whole life, I did have an apartment in Newport, which is very developed, very touristy for a short while, for about 6 years to 6 months, depending on where it is, off of Bellevue Avenue. To avoid the commute I had to make to Newport every day, so I could stay overnight if I had to. People would ask me if I liked living in Newport, and I would say, Newport is a nice place to visit, but Mystic is a nicer place to live. And they got it. I want to keep Mystic a nicer place to live. Don't change the zoning. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lindsay Perk-Fairchild. I live on Greenmanville Avenue. This plan undermines the long-term health of Stonington, something I care about a lot because while I haven't lived here for 50 years, I hope to. And I urge you to turn down this proposal and make way for development that conforms with the current zoning. One of the pillars of creating a vibrant, sustainable village, a place I love to live in, is mixed use, diversity of uses. This plan destroys any future for marine-based uses on the site, while creating more of what we already have. That's not mixed use. That's not diversity. All of this could be built inland, but we will never get this land back for marine use. A loss of diversity in our economy sets us up for an unsustainable economy and financial disaster for Mystic and Stonington in the future. Furthermore, the plan includes a proposal for adding fill to the site. This really disturbs me because increased development and fill, raising the level of the land, will only add to the flooding in the surrounding neighborhood. You don't have to talk about the future storms or what's predicted with climate change. This is a neighborhood that already regularly floods. Increased flooding, increased storm damage will result from this plan. Putting more residents in a floodplain is absolutely reckless. It threatens life and property of residents. Who will be on the hook when the infrastructure washes away and residents must be rescued from homes built with no exits except through floodwaters? I ask that you turn down this plan. Don't flood our homes with stormwater, with traffic, and with short-term unsustainable development.
Good evening. My name is Quentin Snedeker. I've got a property at 70 Denison Avenue here in Mystic. spent the bulk of my career preserving the maritime culture and assets of this community. I've got a background in historic preservation. The boatyards and marinas in this town are really significant historic assets, which is essentially it's the essence of why people come here and are interested in this region to begin with. To lose a significant site will diminish that cultural asset base. In my letter here, I cite a couple of articles talking about the things that Christian McGogan and others have raised tonight, that the reality of the maritime industry is really on the rise. There's increasing demand, tremendous struggle to meet that demand. One of the articles I bring is the fact that Noang Shipyard, Inc., the applicant, has actually taken over the operation of a shipyard at the other end of the state, the former director yard down in Bridgeport. So again, I'm glad to see that that was a significant part of this evening's discussion. The other thing I'd just like to point out is that essentially the wave of this future of this country is economic and demographic diversity. And I see nothing in this plan that addresses any of those issues or mitigates the need for affordable housing. So thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for hosting this, and I'm really happy to almost be at the end of the opposition. My name is Karen Clark. I live at 32 Borrowdale Avenue in Mystic, which is the other side of 27. My husband and I walk into town on a regular basis, and we walk because driving at this time of year is next to impossible sometimes to get across from one side to the other, depending on time of day. You have to know the schedule also of the bridge. Not everybody knows that. I'm opposed to the proposed development of Smiler Wharf as it stands, so the proposal as it stands. And while my concerns are many, I'll focus on 3 of them. And I know these have been discussed tonight, but I want to discuss them one more time in a very quick manner. Congestion. My concern with Willow, Jackson, Washington, Cottrell, and the other streets around it is that they're already strained. The traffic, the sides of the streets are very narrow, and there's really no way to widen those streets. My concern is if this project goes through and with all the traffic that's been discussed already, how many traffic lights are going to have to be added to be able to relieve any part of that congestion? Rising water levels. Well, that's already also been discussed that certain streets in this area already flood during high tides and storms. And even though the proposed buildings are built above level during the storms, the residents really have only one egress, unless you're counting water evacuations and rescues. And we've already seen what that's like in other areas of the country that have been faced with this very same thing. To allow residential development in this area is irresponsible. The flood control measures included in the plan will not be approved by DEEP, and even if they were, putting bulkheads on one side of the river or on one section only forces the water to go somewhere else, like Home Street or Water Street or any of the other surrounding areas. My third concern is infrastructure. This proposal is dependent upon the town of Stonington to make changes to the already overburdened sewer system, which has already been discussed. And I'm concerned that to meet the needs of this development, it will cost the taxpayers of Stonington. And as far as I'm concerned, the tax revenue that this proposal has projected for the town is not worth the cost to the taxpayers of Stonington. We are not getting a bang for our buck here. The cost to the residents is also more than money. The traffic impacts our quality of life. The high-rise buildings, 5 and 6 stories are high-rise for this town, impact the character of the town has already been discussed. People come to Mystic because it's a quaint town with a great mix of history, shopping, restaurants, coffee shops, etc. What they don't like is to have to stand in lines that last for hours, and they don't like to get into Mystic and not have a place to park. So again, this has already been discussed as a problem that needs to be solved first. Bringing more development in will not solve that problem. As it stands, this plan does not even meet our own plan of conservation and development. Does this mean that anytime someone wants to develop a property such as this, that the plan of conservation and development gets thrown out the window? I thought that a plan of conservation and development was a blueprint for just that, conservation and development. What's the point of having a plan if it doesn't get referred to when a development is proposed? I urge you to deny the proposed zone change from the MC80 to the NDD. Thank you.
Hi, Tom Taylor, Water Street. I have a number of statements here, which I will I'll submit. Tom Taylor, Water Street. I have a document that I'll submit, but I have a unique perspective in this project. About a decade ago, I consulted with management for the ownership of the property regarding preliminary plans for a development like this one. And at the time, the conclusion was that the appropriate density, as the gentleman spoke before, was not financially viable, which I think is why we see the proposed density that's been on the table here. And it's my conclusion, based on those discussions at that time, that the inviability of the shipyard is a willful scuttling of that business. And per zoning 8.4.10, financial hardship is not an acceptable premise for a zoning variance or change in use. There's a little bit more I've said about that, but I think that about covers it. Thank you.
Bill Lyman, 579 Togamack Road. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to commend you for allowing the opposition to speak as long as they've needed to make all of the important points that they've made. As you know, at the beginning I was one of the first speakers in the opposition at the last meeting, and at that time the talks were being limited to 2 minutes, so I didn't have a chance to finish my thought, and you indicated there would be time to do that tonight. All right. I'm assuming now is that time. So I have only a couple of things, and they're really not the points that people have been making, but it's more a focus on sort of the big picture of this whole master plan project. I, like many of the people who spoke in opposition, would really like to see some type of improvement being made to the Seaport Marine property. The question is, what kind of design, what kind of project really would suit the needs of the property, but also not draw the kind of opposition that you've seen here over the past 2 nights. Clearly, if there's to be a successful project down there, it's one that doesn't draw this kind of opposition. So the question is, who is the best? What is the best way to design something a little different than what we've heard? I feel that the developer and all those involved in making this proposal have had 2 nights of listening to a lot of reasons why there is opposition, and if they are truly creative, can come up with perhaps some changes that wouldn't meet this kind of opposition. The other thing I'm aware of is that you as a commission have lots of power with this whole master plan process. I would ask you to consider this. If you take the plan as proposed and start putting attachments on it and start putting codicils on it and start putting modifications on it, then you as a board will be designing this project. It's been my experience that a project of this nature, designed by committee, won't turn out well. So I urge you as a commission to resist doing that. I think that you have no alternative based on what you've heard to deny the master plan as it's been proposed because of the framework it sets up, encourage the developer to have another look at it and come up with something that would be an improvement that doesn't generate this kind of opposition but could actually generate support. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Pam Gibbs. I've been a resident of Noank and Mystic for the past 60 years, and for the last 27 years I've lived at 14 Jackson Avenue, which overlooks the proposed site of Smiler's Wharf from the east. We bought our property knowing that Seaport Marine was zoned MC80, and I urge you, the commissioners, not to change the zoning to NDD. And I oppose it for many reasons, and as you can imagine, Paul Sarter covered most of them. But I will just give you a couple of ones that I feel very strongly about, and first of all, citing new residential buildings in a flood-prone area is against regulations and is being irresponsible by putting human life in harm's way. We know the DEP has already warned about this and that sea level rise is imminent. We all need to understand this is real and take it seriously. Building residential structures so close to the water will not allow the wetlands to naturally migrate and allow it to protect the land as sea level rise occurs. The structures will disrupt the existing wildlife in a cove we overlook. There's purple martins, red-winged blackbirds, hawks, egrets, and herons, as well as red-tailed fox and deer. And quite frankly, I'll be upset if I can't be there to see this. This proposed plan will also obstruct our neighborhood water view. The height and placement of the buildings will dwarf our neighborhood and will not enhance it. And I'd like to note at the last meeting on June 17th, the fly-through presentation did not show the view from the east, which is our neighborhood, looking west to Smiler's Wharf. That's biased and shows who we're dealing with. As proposed, Smiler's Wharf will bring more people, as we all know, and with it noise pollution, with an increase in vehicle traffic. We all know the traffic problems, along with the parking issues, have overwhelmed our neighborhood for years. And I have a big beef about coming up with an idea of the overflow parking by putting a parking lot on Jackson Avenue, which will be disruptive and certainly not enhance our neighborhood and will not be safe. So, commissioners, I urge you to please do the right thing for our town, our neighborhood, and not ignore the Coastal Management Act and Stonington's own plan of conservation and development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Bill Sternberg. I was the first speaker in opposition, and I radically truncated my remarks the other night, so I came back because I've got a few other things I want to get into the record. I've now read the bond application, the economic analysis, the POCD cover to cover, and the zoning regs cover to cover. And I actually have about 140 notes from the review of those documents. At about 6:15 tonight, I emailed this package to Keith, so you guys have that for the record.
Thank you.
First thing I want to mention is I'm trained in mathematics. I've spent my entire career in an engineering environment. So when I read a document full of numbers like the economic analysis, I'm looking out for things that make, should I believe these numbers? Should I not believe these numbers? And my assessment of the economic analysis that was provided to the town is it's, one, really badly written, which is not a reason to reject it or accept it, but it is really badly written. But the numbers, they're all over the map. And without getting into the details, I'm going to give you one example of why you as a commission should be very skeptical of any numbers presented by the applicant. Okay? They make a statement in one of the tables that the investment value of the commercial side of the property is $29 million. $4 million of that is already existing Red 36. In another table, they say the market value of the residential portion is $11 million. So there is no way that I could figure out from that economic analysis what the total investment value of this project is, because they didn't use consistent units. That's a very fundamental thing to look at when you're looking at a numerical analysis. Are the units consistent? They're not consistent in the economic analysis. Got a couple other things, and I got to put on my reading glasses. Sorry.
Is this all in your packets you sent to Keith? Because we can read.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to highlight, though. And one of them I think has already been mentioned briefly, that in 2012, the applicant applied for a mixed-use marine support facility, which became Red 36. Connecticut Deep asked for a waterfront walkway at that time, which never materialized. Now they are proposing a second building as a marine support facility. And the question is, what happened to the first one? Okay, well, it turned into a restaurant, apparently. Okay, the next thing, the applicant at the previous hearing submitted what they said was 200 letters of support. We got the letters from the planning staff. There are actually 185 letters in the package. There's maybe a dozen or so letters that were submitted independently that I don't know if there's overlap between what the applicant gave you and what came in from individuals. But I went through and I looked at, where were the letters from? So 185 letters.
Bill, we've got all the letters. We've read. We're going to read them. We're going to go through them. We know where they're from. They're not all from Mystic residents. They're from all over the place. And so we understand that.
Can I continue?
Well, listen, we're running out of time. That's all I'm saying.
You have not enforced the time limit rule from the very beginning. So to try to enforce
I have been very lenient tonight, but we only have an hour and a half left.
I want the same treatment that every other person who's spoken has been given. I curtailed my remarks on the first night.
I mean, you've said you've given it all to us in paper, so why don't we can read it?
Maybe the people here the people who are here should hear the numbers. So there's 62 letters from people in the town of Stonington. There's 38 letters from the people from Groton. There's 8 from Westerly. There's 5 from North Stonington. There's 45 from other towns, including Saugus, Massachusetts, of all places. There are 27 letters with no address on them. And there are 59 illegible signatures. So I know Paul Sarter gave you about 400 signatures on a petition tonight. with addresses. You can trace those people. I'm going to go to one thing in the POCD. And the POCD is a great document, all right? Whoever did that work did a really good job. On page 30 of the POCD, it says, restrict hotels which have the potential to increase exposure of vulnerable populations in coastal flood hazard areas. The POCD literally says, do not put a hotel in a flood zone. So this board, how any reasonable person could find that this proposal conforms to our POCD when it's putting a hotel in a flood zone? Well, a reasonable person couldn't reach that conclusion. And there's 100 some other things related to the POCD that get you to the same place. A reasonable person can't reach the conclusion that this proposal conforms with the POCD.
Thank you. Anyone else? Take a 5-minute recess. 5-minute break? Keep going. Let's finish the public comment. Okay. Anyone like to speak in here that would like to speak general comments on this application? A few people have signed up. I don't know if they're here. General comments. Ben?
Missing a page.
I'm good. Not on your general comments. Your name's here. I'll call you.
Okay.
I'm not missing a page.
Speak every time.
You're about the last one. What? No, I'm saying talking to Colleen down at Rumo on the list.
So, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I'd like to make your job a little easier for you tonight. Your staff report, prepared by Keith, has a draft motion to approve the application. I felt what was missing from the staff report was a draft motion of denial, which I think is kind of a no-brainer for you. So I borrowed a little bit of the language from Keith's motion to approve, and I came up with a motion of denial, a resolution of denial, which I'd like to read. Whereas in accordance with the zoning regulations, section 7.21.2, the applicant's proposal is found by the commission to fail to satisfy the statement of purpose of the Neighborhood Development District, NDD, specifically 7.21.2.2, harmony with the surrounding residential neighborhoods, promotion of pedestrian safety, provision for adequate parking, etc., and 7.21.2.3, furtherance of the goals, standards, and policies of the Connecticut Coastal Area Management Act. Whereas, in accordance with the zoning regulations 7.21.3.3, the applicant's proposal is found by the Commission to fail to meet the eligibility requirements of the NDD, specifically the inability to tie into the public sewer due to a current moratorium on such new hookups. Whereas, in accordance with zoning regulations section 8.8.2, the applicant is found by the Commission to fail to satisfy the impact statement requirements for zoning map amendments, specifically failing to meet 8.8.2.2 due to the current configuration of Cottrell Street and the lack of public support for making it one-way. 8.8.2.3, again, the lack of public sewer capacity at this time. 8.8.2.4.3, due to the lack of compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood. Whereas this proposal has been found by the Commission to be inconsistent with the town's plan of conservation and development adopted May 7, 2015, specifically Section 7.2, encouraging protection of historic resources, of which marina facilities certainly are, Section 8.3.3, addressing parking issues, which this proposal clearly does not, 9.2.1, promoting development that is in keeping with the character of the overall neighborhood, 10.4.1, which promotes marine services as an economic driver, and 15.1, future land use. Resolved that the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Stonington has reviewed PZ 1908ZC Knowing Shipyard and is determined that this application is not in compliance with the zoning regulations of the Town of Stonington and is therefore denied. Adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Stonington, Connecticut, this 8th day of July 2019. Actually, I added the date. Make it easy. I printed it on orange paper for you so that you can find it in your packets when you need it. Couldn't be easier. Thank you very much.
Wendy Canty. Liz Stern. Is she here? Chuck's needing he talk. Is Chuck here? Fran Hoffman.
Chuck's heading, I'm on my way.
Oh, you asked him. Fran Hoffman. And then I'm going right down the list now. Pan Gibb. No. Jim Swearington. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the commission and staff for quite a few hours of enduring this. Where you are, I have been, and it's not an easy job, but it's a good one and it's an important one. A couple of points that I wanted to bring up. I promise not to be dramatic, or I'll try and get it done in 2 minutes.
Thank you.
The neighborhood development district puts you in a little different position than you've been in most of the time. Generally, it's very easy for you to tell whether you're acting in your administrative capacity or your legislative capacity. When working with a floating zone, and in particular the neighborhood development district, you are actually acting in your legislative capacity, but you have administrative direction from the NDD. Unlike other zone changes, this one specifically spells out rules that you should go by in acting in your legislative capacity. That makes you need to wear... You okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, excuse me.
I didn't mean to choke you up.
Go ahead.
So you're acting in your legislative capacity, but with some direction from the NDD. I think the most important direction, without reading the whole regulation to you, is in the statement of purpose. And in watching tonight and listening, actually for 2 nights now, that the statement of purpose says that you should encourage the reclamation and underutilize of commercial properties. I just want to touch on a little bit of what's been said tonight and how I know that to be different than what I saw and what I've seen up to this point. I didn't hear the applicants say that they had neglected their property or couldn't make a go of being a marina. What I know of the site in the 15 or 20 years I've been involved in one way or another in land use is a property that has been heavily invested upon. I think they doubled the amount of slips that were there, and their new application increases the number of slips. So we're not going to lose a marina. The community's not going to lose a marina, and the applicant isn't going to lose a marina. There's going to be boats on that site. We have a restaurant now, and in the MC80, he could have more restaurants. As long as he doesn't go over 100 seats per restaurant, theoretically, there could be a strip down there with restaurants and commercial property that I think would be a significantly higher traffic pull than what's there. But we're not losing a marina. What we are losing, interestingly enough, I'm a wooden boat guy. And I toured those buildings when I first went on planning and zoning. Jason took me around the community to see some of the areas that needed redevelopment, that couldn't be used the way they were used. And I was delighted with one of the buildings that was falling apart. It had a place in it where they steamed 30-foot planks for planking boats. I really don't think that we want to be steaming 30-foot planks on boats on one of the most important properties in our community. They also had band saws for cutting wood that were run by leather belts in the building from when they were building wooden boats there. And I don't think that's a practical use of that building anymore. And the structure of the building really lent itself to making old wooden boats and repairing them. So we're not losing a marina, we're keeping a marina, and I think that the statement of purpose is completely fulfilled with the application. The one last thing I want to say is, in addition to reading the words of the law, and that's really what our regulations are, that's the law we have to go by, and the rights that the property owner has, or the rights that you're going to take away from them when you make new laws. The rights that he has, or the rights that he's asking for, are reasonable given this piece of land. And you also have to look at this law and say, what was the intent of the people that wrote it a decade ago? I can tell you that the intent with this regulation was to encourage a developer to do exactly what this application is bringing forward. Your job is to look at this and somehow, out of the hundreds of people that have spoke, make a decision that benefits the community and serves your purpose. I'm glad it's you in the seat, not me in the seat, and I appreciate your patience in listening to me. This is a good application. Thank you.
Fran?
Hi, Frances Hoffman, 15 Nyack Point, Mystic. A little bit about my background. I have a doctorate in social planning and policy, and I've spent my career doing redevelopment of brownfields properties throughout the country. And I served on this wonderful commission. Thank you for your service. It's good to see you all again. Mine are general comments, and in that regard, they're questions that I feel you must be answering in your own heads. As you, the presentations have been eloquent and very cogent, and so you have a lot more information with you now than I had when I wrote my comments, but I'm sure you'll factor them in. First of all, these are 9 questions that I think are important for you and for us to be answering. One, is this project in conformance with the Stonington Plan of Conservation and Development? Does this proposal protect and enhance the village of downtown Mystic? Does it encourage village-scale residential development? That's number 1. Number 2, can our existing infrastructure of roads, sidewalks, fire, police, and wastewater treatment support this project? What additional resources would be required? What would they cost? How will they be paid for? 3, is the method of management of sewage and wastewater generated by this proposed development adequate and acceptable to the town of Stonington? Should developers pay for this as they increase the burden to the town's infrastructure? Number 4, what is the likely impact upstream and on low-lying neighborhood properties of the proposed hardscape bulkhead? Is this advised science-based approach to an effective management of coastline shorelines? And number 5, how will the quality of life of our critical, valued, and fragile historic residential area in downtown Mystic be impacted by this project? Number 6, what is the likely impact of the numbers of people expected to use this proposed hotel, the residential units, and additional large restaurant on Mystic and Stonington? Impacts on parking, traffic congestion, and safety. What would the impact, number 7, what would the impact of the proposed height on the appearance of the Mystic River and the harbor? Does it contribute positively to the attractiveness of this pivotal location at the mouth of the river and enhance an entrance to the harbor and to Mystic? Will the village scale charm and shoreline beauty of our town and the village of Mystic, which is so appreciated by those of us that live in the area and which also serve as the base for tourism, be ended or be eroded, by the scale of the proposed project? Number 8, can this commission justify ignoring the strong statement by the Connecticut DEEP opposing the project? And last of all, this is a question I think it affects us publicly in our pocketbook. They're bond questions. So the bonds are real money. They need real commitment, and they have real public expenditure and consequences. What are the specific terms of the $10 million bond reported by the news media that would help finance the project? What are the benefits and the risks and the liabilities to the various parties, including the public? Is it possible to have state bonds committed before a project has been approved through the public town decision-making process? And my last part of this bond question, will the other reported $10 million bond that was designated for general infrastructure improvements town-wide still be available to the town, or will it not be available if the $10 million bond is designated for the proposed project? Are we in a trade-off situation, and what are the trade-offs? Those questions have not been asked before, but I think have real importance to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pam Gibb?
She already spoke.
She did? Okay. Eric Courier, he's spoken. Oh, John Swarrington, is he here? Jen McCarthy? Nick Solano, 26 Denison Avenue. All right. And Bentansky, Colleen Donnarumma, the last one.
For the record, my name is Carlene Donnarumma. I live at 22 Oakwood Avenue in Pawcatuck. You've heard a lot of testimony in these deliberations, not only from the neighborhood, which will ultimately be affected if approved as presented, but also from people throughout the whole town of Stonington. It appears not only is there great opposition to the proposal itself, but more importantly, I view the opposition as an indictment against the NDD regulations themselves. Regulations that have no bounds, no height limitations, no setbacks, no floor area ratio, no maximum lot coverage requirements. In other words, you can do whatever you want, even without providing adequate on-site parking. As a commission member, you took an oath of office to, quote, faithfully discharge according to the law, your duties as a member of the Town of Stonington Planning and Zoning Commission. The question now becomes, do you sell your soul and risk your integrity as a commission member by disregarding state and local regulations? You know, sometimes it takes 3 tries in this town to get an application that is acceptable to the whole town. Someone who spoke in favor said, give them a chance. Yes, give them a chance to come back with an application that everyone can live with, not just the immediate neighborhood, but the community as a whole. Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak in general comments? Want to take a 5-minute break? You want to go?
Yeah.
Take a 5-minute break. Yeah, give that back to Keith.